The Minat Chess na Legislature in Guam is called to order. Mr. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to adopt this legislative session agenda dated September 14, 2015.
Hearing objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker?
Yes, please.
And I also move to delete items 2, 3, 4, and 5 of this agenda and proceed to roll call.
Hearing objections, so ordered. Would the clerks please take roll call?
Senator Tom Adda. Senator Tom Adda. Senator Tony Adda. Senator Uggan. Senator Blas. Vice Speaker Cruz.
Present.
Senator Espaldon. Senator McCready. Senator Morrison. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator San Nicolas. Senator Torres. Senator Underwood. Speaker Wampat.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that we approve the legislative journal dated September 1st, 2015, subject to correction.
Objections, so ordered.
And there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be penned today's session journal,
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
as well as messages from Imagala and Guam. I move that they be penned today's session journal,
No objections, so ordered.
as well as reports of standing committees. I move for the same.
No objections, so ordered.
There are no reports of select committees, but under item 12, introduction and first reading of bills, resolutions, and certificates, I move that bill numbers 171-33COR through 175-33COR, resolution number 173-33LS through 175-33LS, resolution number 176-33COR to 182-33COR, certificate number 72-33LS through 73-33LS, as well as certificate number 74-33COR to 76-33COR, all be given its first reading.
No objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, my one and only motion for this call to session really centers around the veto of substitute bill number 139-33COR, and it's an act to disapprove the proposed Chamorro Land Trust Commission CLTC rules and regulations for commercial use transmitted by Imagalan Guahan to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guahan on June 3, 2015. At this time, I move that notwithstanding the objections of Imagalan Guahan, I move that this legislature override the veto of bill number 139-33 with some discussion.
So on that motion, is there any discussion? Senator Respicio.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll lead off the discussions by pleading to my colleagues to override the governor's veto of this bill, to say that we're at this juncture, and there's two reasons to approach this. And one reason is the process as to whether or not this legislature should have an opportunity to finish off on a process that we started with respect to the proposed rules and regulations of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. The other argument being, of course, the merits of these proposed rules and regulations, and for me, I'd like to focus on the process. It's always a tough position to take to want to override any governor's veto, but I think that in this case, it's almost imperative that we do as a body. It's imperative that we do this as a body, Madam Speaker, because when the legislature received these proposed rules and regulations, and specifically it was received on June 3rd, 2015, our oversight chair, Senator Tom Adda, together with his committee, as well as the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, as well as the Director of Land Management, worked very hard to take these rules and regulations that were introduced and try to make it evolve into something that was both not only palatable to the legislature, but to the governor, but also palatable in a sense to raise those and address those concerns that were raised during the public hearing process. As you know, at the same time, we were engaged in the budget session, which the Vice Speaker spearheaded, and after the budget session, the legislature then had an opportunity to go forward with addressing these proposed rules and regulations. Senator Atta, through his hard work and working closely with the Director of Land Management, Mr. Borja, worked really hard to present a substitute version to this legislature, which this legislature went in the committee of the whole, and there was extensive discussion as to how these bills, as substituted, are much better than the bills as introduced. Fortunately, the legislature, the only recourse it had was to pass a bill that disapproved these rules and regulations in total. And so the legislature affirms from that point going forward that we acted well within the 90 days given to us by the statute provided through the AAA process. The legislature within 90 days was very clear, Madam Speaker and colleagues, that Bill number 139-33 COR passed almost unanimously, and there were 14 votes, and had I been here, I would have certainly voted as well to disapprove the rules and regs. But given my excused absence, I could have very well registered my support for this bill to disapprove the rules and regs, because I would have understood, as my colleagues did, that we needed more time to make sure that the rules that were adopted ultimately by this government as policy are rules and regs that reflect those concerns raised through the public hearing process. And the legislature acted well within its right, well within 90 days, to pass Bill 139-33. And then the governor, he vetoed this bill, and in his own veto message to you, Madam Speaker, also raises the issue as to whether or not the Attorney General will agree that these rules and regulations are now a matter of law. And I stand before you and before our colleagues to plead that we do have an override, because if the legislature believed at that time, 14 senators, myself included, 15 senators believe at the time that these rules and regulations as introduced should not have lapsed into administrative law, should not be the law of the land, I don't think anything should have changed from when that vote is taken to where we're at today. But I believe what will change, Madam Speaker, is if we don't have an override attempt and this override attempt fails, then it would give the governor more resolve to say that these rules and regs are a matter of administrative law, are a matter of law, simply because the legislature attempted an override and the override attempt failed. And so I'm asking, as a matter of process and as a matter of from the institutional perspective, that the legislature plays an important role in the administrative rules and regulations making process. And because the legislature passed the bill well within the 90 days, we affirmed that these rules and regs should not be implemented. But I think to further show that these rules and regs should not be implemented because the legislature took action to disapprove these rules and regs, that would only be affirmed if this override is actually taken. And so I'm asking at this time if our colleagues will agree with that assessment, move to override the bill, override the governor's veto, and recognize that Senator Atta, in his oversight capacity over this issue, has already introduced another bill that he's working closely with the Director of Land Management and Chamorro Land Trust Commission to continue the process. And I think just by overriding and the veto and making sure that there should be no further ambiguity with respect to how these rules and regs should be applied, that to override the governor's veto and then to reset everything where we're going to remove any ambiguities thereof, that we can proceed with another legislation that our oversight chairman will guide us on. And so I make this motion hoping that at least 9 other colleagues will agree how important it is to override the governor's veto.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other speakers on the motion? Senator Frank Voss, Jr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I can appreciate, and I need to be able to qualify what I'm about to say, in that, yes, I did vote for the bill as we had passed it 14-0, because yes, I believed that there were some changes that would have been necessary to be able to have the rules and regulations in place. But with regards to the override of this veto, Madam Speaker, my objection to the override is not based on the substance of the bill. My objection to the override is based on the process of why we're here. In his message, his veto message, the governor has basically stated that he believed that this body had taken more time than was allowed to be able to come to its decision. And so therefore, because he believed that we took more time than necessary, he vetoed the bill. This body believes otherwise, that this body believed that we did act in accordance, we did act in accordance with the timelines. Clearly, this is a disagreement between two branches of government. Madam Speaker, you know, in our form of government, there is actually three branches. A third branch, the judicial branch, is actually set up to be able to mediate or to handle disputes between the two branches of government. And I think this is a clear instance and a clear case of where I believe we should have actually gone with this action. To get clarity from the judicial branch, from the judiciary, as to whether or not, in fact, the process that we went through was right, or what the executive branch contends is right. It would have been resolved there. And so, you know, with that, Madam Speaker, you know, if this body was to be successful in this override, my then concern is, okay, so that basically voids this, or this actually brings this back on. But the problem is, at what date? Today's the 14th of September. We're going to go get back to the whole process and the whole concern of when does the 90 days end? The governor vetoed this bill. If we in turn on the 14th of September override that veto, when does then the rules and regulations actually get promulgated? The 14th of September? That question can't be answered here with any clarity. If it is in 14th of September, then then there's a question as to whether or not it's past the 90 days. And then it may bring up another can of worms that we don't want to go down, or that we don't want to open. So again, I need to qualify my objection to the override. It's not in the substance. Yes, I agree that there may have been issues. There are issues that that collectively between the two branches, we could have come up with better rules and regulations. My objection to it is the process. So I'm asking my colleagues to consider that. But also consider when does the effective date take place? And does that affect, legally, then does that affect? Because then it goes back to the AAA, doesn't it? And I think that the courts, the judiciary is set up so that we can get clarity on that. So everything we did in the past, everything we're doing today, and everything we do in the future, there is clarity with what we do. When does the 90-day end? And that was the whole reason for his objection, for his veto. Obviously, two branches of governments disagree with each other. Let's look to the third branch to be able to help us to clarify this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Senator Tometa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I can't agree more with the Majority Leader who opened the discussion saying that the override of a governor's veto certainly is an action that we should not be taken lightly. And I certainly agree with that fully. But I think we got to ask ourselves, though, why is the passage or why is this veto override so important? And to that, I would say that if the veto is overridden, it gives us a fresh start to move forward. And it's important that we move forward for the same reason that all of us agree with. We have to begin addressing the backlog of about 8,000 plus applications in the Chamorro Land Trust program. Applications that were started being taken in back in 1995 and has accumulated up to about 8,000. And the reason for that backlog is because before leases can be given out to satisfy these applications, the Chamorro Land Trust properties out there need to be surveyed. We need to put infrastructure, primarily because of the fact that many of those properties sit over the northern aquifer up in the north. But to do all that requires funds. And so certainly by being able to lease for commercial use many of the properties that are available out there, then the Chamorro Land Trust will be able to lease out these properties and begin generating revenue. But before we can do that, of course, the law requires that we adopt a set of rules and regulations must be adopted. Now, I guess, you know, with an override, it's one thing to override a veto and then kind of like, and then what? I think in this particular case here, the steps that follow afterwards is very clear. The veto, if it is overridden today, cleans the slate and we can move forward from where we left off back on August 28th. And we can move forward by beginning the deliberations on a bill that has been introduced, which basically takes the rules and regulations that in general everybody appears to find certainly very workable from the standpoint of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. They have looked at the rules and regs that was in Bill 139. They seem fine with that. But then also during the discussions, the legislature raised some very valid concerns. And those concerns was, we want to make sure that there's not a runaway leasing, commercial leasing of properties, and in the end, we don't have enough properties for residential leases. And so I think the bill that has been introduced will address that by, you know, requiring that the Chamorro Land Trust Commission identifies ahead of time the list of properties that it wants leased out and provide it to the legislature for information so that we know ahead of time what properties are going to be taken out of the inventory and not find in a roundabout way bits and pieces and just piecing things together that, you know, a 400-acre lot is going to be leased out. I mean, that kind of like takes everybody aback. And so, you know, it addresses that bill, addresses that. There was a concern that the leases would be given out to even non-Chamorros. Well, guess what? The law allows for that. So I think that by then overriding the veto, we get a clean slate, we move forward, we already have our next steps mapped out. In fact, the Bill 175, the new starting point, is already scheduled for a public hearing on next Monday, September 21st at 6 p.m. And then as soon as the next session is called, we can then begin to entertain that. But it's important that we move forward to begin addressing the backlog of 8,000 applications. And we can argue all day long about procedures, and I certainly think those are very important issues, but I'm trying to look at that from a very practical standpoint of how do we begin addressing that backlog of 8,000 applications, and it has taken us 40 years to get to where we are today. We cannot afford to stop now because of debates over procedures and the what-ifs. I feel confident that if we do what we're here to do today, what we're supposed to do today, and move forward, we can reach our objectives. You know, it's ironic that probably we agree on 90% of everything, of a lot of things here, especially when it comes to the Chamorro Land Trust. But we seem to be bogged down on this last 10% on procedures. But I think we've kind of laid out the path ahead, and I just ask my colleagues to consider, let's clean the slate now, let's move forward. The suggestions about going to the judicial branch to get the interpretations from over there, that's fine. We should also move with that. But, we should continue moving on simultaneous paths to reach the same objective that everybody wants to achieve. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. Does anybody else would like to speak on the motion? There being none on the motion, then. Oh, okay. Senator, yes, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I know that I agree with our majority leader in that an override really is a very, very serious action that this body would take. And I have given a lot of thought over the weekend, knowing that we were going to face the question as to whether we're actually going to do this. So I reflected on why we have the Chamorro Land Trust in the first place and why this body had opposed or disapproved the bill, the rules and regs, as we did a couple of weeks ago. And I came up with this, that, Madam Speaker, from the black soil of Talafofo to the red dirt of Dededo, the island of Guam is rich in agricultural potential and in providing space for people to raise their families. But the island is not abundant in the availability of land. Guam is small. In combination with the fact that the original people of Guam, the Chamorro people, have experienced centuries of colonialism and economic penetration, the Chamorro people are less likely in this century to own a piece of their own homeland in any other time period of Guam's history. In an effort to stem the tide of landlessness and to prevent the tragic fate of so many indigenous people around the world, we have instituted here in Guam the Chamorro Land Trust system. It isn't perfect, but it is the most dramatic and comprehensive effort to provide a future land base in perpetuity for the Chamorro people of Guam. While we can argue about how to perfect the management of these lands, we should not seek to reintroduce the very forces which led to the loss of land to become part of the Chamorro Land Trust. If we allow unrestricted economic penetration to enter the system of the Chamorro Land Trust holdings, we would be supporting the very same processes which has led poor Chamorro families to give up title to their lands for smaller amounts, which led to huge benefits for outside investors. Under this logic, we should allow the Chamorro Land Trust to lease land to the military. I understand the need for gaining resources to help sustain the Chamorro Land Trust, but it should be limited and guided, and we should not allow cherry picking of the best properties. We should also seek the involvement of Chamorros in the lease process to ensure that the economic benefits of leases are shared and grow throughout the community. The previous rules, the rules that had been presented of the Chamorro Land Trust did not, and that was why we opposed it. This is most unfortunate, and so I urge my colleagues to override the governor's veto. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the motion? Senator San Nicolas?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to speak a little bit about what it is that we're trying to override and why we're trying to do it. When these rules and regulations were brought to us initially and we deliberated on it as a body, several things jumped out at us, definitely jumped out at me with respect to what the proposed rules and regulations were going to allow. They were going to allow for the Chamorro Land Trust property to be leased out for commercial purposes. And one of the biggest concerns that I had was that there was no limit as to how much property could be leased out for commercial purposes. Now, we all know there's only so much land in the land trust, and there's over 8,000 people waiting for their own legally entitled portion of that. And if we have far too many commercial leases going out there, eating up all that land, we're not going to have enough for the residential purposes. And so what I wanted to do back in that previous session was put an amendment in to allow for a limited amount of commercial property to be used, limiting it so that we can make sure we still have enough land for the residents for whom the Chamorro Land Trust is actually intended. The reason why I did not proffer that amendment was because through discussion here on this floor, we all came to a consensus that we're going to reject those rules and regulations, send it back through the chairman to go and work with the land trust so they can address all of those concerns. So the amendment I wanted to proffer never got proffered because we all came to the understanding that we're going to go back to the drawing board and involve everybody in the process to make sure those concerns were addressed. That's why this entire body said no. We all said no because we all agreed that we need to go back and redraw the plan. Now, if I had known that we were going to say no, but it was going to get vetoed or whatever, I may have proffered the amendment. There's so many different things that may have happened, Madam Speaker, if we had known today what we know now, if we had known then what we know now about where this all was going to take us. Because in all of our understandings, Madam Speaker, we always believe that when we say no, no means no. No means no. It doesn't mean veto it and come up with a reason why you're going to turn our no as a body into your yes. And that's why we need to override this veto, Madam Speaker. Because we said no, and if you think you're going to veto and turn our no into a yes, we need to remind you that when the legislature says no, no means no. Now I can understand, Madam Speaker, if it was 9 of us or 8 of us and there weren't enough of us to vote for an override, but every single member who was present in that session voted no. So if no means no, then let's vote to override the governor's veto and make it very clear that your action cannot turn ours into a yes when we clearly say no. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Are there any other speakers who would like the opportunity to speak? Senator Espada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A lot of light was shed in terms of what happened at the last session when we addressed this particular issue, and I agree with them. all members present, voted to disapprove of the rules as they were presented to us on the floor, with the understanding that we would address what we perceived to be perhaps some loopholes, maybe some regulations or rules that needed to be included. And then again, and I know at the time the chairman of the committee, who really wanted to get the rules through, essentially understood what was going on the floor among the members of this body, and that is we had a lot of concerns. We also were of the opinion that this needs to move forward, but it needs to be done with the possibility of addressing the concerns that we all had. Fast forward to today, I guess I'm having trouble. I might not be able to articulate it well, and I'm going to try my best. I guess what it comes out to me today is that the question becomes, even if we override this veto, what force and effect does it really have? Because the way the governor has sent his message down to you, Madam Speaker, and how he's kind of pronounced it to the public, is that the rules took effect in essence because we did not act upon them within the 90 days as required by law. And so, in effect, he's saying that because we overstepped that 90 days, whatever we did had no force and effect because we already surpassed the 90 days. And so if you just stick with me one more step, Madam Speaker, if that is true, then even if we if we try to override this veto on an issue that had no force and effect, or an action that had no force and effect, because we have already surpassed, then this override attempt also would have no force and effect. And I'm just wondering if maybe I'm just thinking of this wrong, or if I'm making life a little more complicated than it should be and overanalyzing. But if you really think about it, it seems to make some kind of sense, at least in my mind it does. If the rules came into place because we passed 90 days, and even if the governor vetoed the bill, anything that we do still doesn't amount to anything because we surpassed the 90 days at the very start. And so the question now is, well, what do we do? I mean, I do understand what the previous speaker from Barragata has spoken about, is maybe we let the judicial processes play on to try to understand, really, did this body really surpass 90 days? Or did it not? But I also understand the arguments that if we do nothing and allow it to be in effect, allow the rules to be in effect, even though we didn't necessarily agree with all of them, or felt that the rules as presented had too many loopholes that may work to the detriment of the Chamorro people, the trustees, basically, of the Chamorro Land Trust, then we need to go and correct them. And so I can understand that argument, that in the event that maybe the legislature, this body, actually did work within the framework of the 90 days and it was valid, if there is an opinion down the road, then there would be an effect in terms of this motion to override. I am neither endorsing this movement at this point to override the veto, nor am I opposing it. I still need a few more seconds. I'm gonna milk each second while we're in this session right now to really come to a conclusion how I'm going to act on this particular motion to override the governor's veto. But with that, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to almost articulate some of the concerns I have, the technical, and it's a very technical concern in terms of moving forward. But with that, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the time.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I agree with all the previous speakers that this really is unprecedented, what we're doing here today, because I've been working with the legislature on and off now since 40 years ago this month. And I have never, in my 40 years, known of the governor vetoing a decision by the legislature to say no to a regulation that it had been reviewing. So that is unprecedented. But I think we can, as it relates to the time issue, I think we can take some precedent from the budget. All of us have been around for a number of years, and the budget, we all know, has to be passed by the 1st of October of each fiscal year. And there used to be a time, I remember when I was working in the legislature in the 70s, where we would actually shimmy up an employee to keep turning the clock back so that it never got to midnight of the 1st. Thankfully, a few years ago, the majority leader introduced legislation where we made it a point to make sure that we passed the budget by the 30th of August so that we wouldn't have that problem. But the way that the law is currently written, in the event that the legislature does not pass a budget by the 1st of October, the governor has the right to roll over the budget that he had for the previous year. But if the legislature had sometime during the month of September voted for a budget that the governor had vetoed, and the legislature was not able to pass a new bill, override it or pass a new bill, the governor then had no recourse but to close down government on the 1st of October because the legislature had passed a budget that he had vetoed. It was that no means no that was spoken about earlier by one of the earlier speakers. And so the legislature did, in a timely fashion, act before the 90th day to say no. The difference was that action had to be taken by means of a bill which would not become a law until the governor signed it into law or allowed it to lapse into law. None of us expected that it was going to be vetoed because it had never been done before. And so I think we have met the 90 days where we've acted. And I think we can also look to what's happening in the U.S. Congress this last week, that this is not unique, what we're facing at this point. In 2012, the Congress passed an act that authorized the President and the Secretary of State to negotiate a deal with Iran. Everybody expected that the president that was speaking at that time was going to have this ironclad deal with Iran that all of them could possibly vote for. In that bill, that congressional act that happened in 2012, they gave themselves 60 days within which to approve the deal that was going to be negotiated by the President and the Secretary of State. The deal was placed before Congress, and as you saw, any of you that have been watching CNN or C-SPAN, Congress spent all of last week debating whether or not they should pass a resolution in disapproval of the deal. And the President fully expected that the House and the Senate was going to pass a joint resolution disapproving his deal. And he was furiously lobbying to get votes to make sure that when and if the Congress did pass that resolution of disapproval, that he was going to have enough votes to make sure that his veto would stand, because there would be an insufficient number of votes to override it. And so that's why it was imperative that the Senate get the 40 votes to make sure that it was known that when and if the President has to veto a congressional resolution that disapproves the deal, that he had sufficient votes to uphold his veto. So it is something that happens between executive and legislative branches, and it is not something, it's not an OOG. The legislature did say that under the administrative rules and regulations that it would come to the legislature, and if we acted within 90 days of disapproving it, then the rules would not go into effect. We could allow it to lapse, or we could approve it. The legislature said no, and it should have been no but for the veto. And since there has been a veto, it is imperative upon this body to, at this point, vote to reassert or no by overriding that veto. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Mr. Vice Speaker. Are there any others? There being none. Okay. Senator Bishop.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to rise to say I appreciate the discussion generated this afternoon regarding rules and regulations. I want to continue to add to the discussion that over the years I've seen this legislature and previous legislatures respond to how rules and regulations are adopted. In some instances, the legislature has passed a bill. In other instances, a legislature has passed resolutions to either approve or disapprove rules and regulations before it. There's another time when I recalled that in my committee, it was on the 87th day on the rules and regs to establish the fee schedule for the Biosecurities Initiative by former Senator Chris Duenas. And on the 87th day, the Port Authority and our oversight chair raised some concerns with respect to how that matter would be implemented. It took me just simply writing to the Director of Agriculture, returning the rules and regs, asking that they go to address the concerns raised by the Port Authority, and I called a roundtable hearing almost immediately, had those issues vetted through the roundtable meeting that we had. Department of Agriculture agreed to the concerns raised by the Port Authority, and we said at the time if they were to resubmit the rules and regs and just address the concerns raised by the other agencies, that those rules and regs would just lapse into law. And they did. And the oversight chair of Port Authority was happy with the changes. Everybody was happy with the changes. But as oversight chair, I didn't want to stand in the way of having those rules and regs not being implemented. I also didn't want to stand and have those rules lapse into law without those very serious issues being raised. I even recall a time when the legislature was in between terms and we were going to adjourn synodine, that the legislature passed a resolution that blanketly said that any rules and regulations before the legislature are hereby deemed disapproved. And so with one fell swoop, all of those pending resolutions before us, because we know they would have automatically lapsed into law once that 90-day was met, we knew that those rules and regs, we'd never had an opportunity as a legislative body to address some of those rules and regs because we were going to adjourn synodine. And it simply took the legislature passing a resolution saying we didn't even name the rules and regulations that were received by our legislative secretary. We just simply said all resolutions pending before the Guam Legislature are hereby deemed disapproved. And so those actions certainly affirm that the legislature acted on this. And I'm happy that we're having this issue being raised, and I'm hoping that the legislature will affirm that the action that we took with respect to this bill is well within the 90 days, and the 90 days again begins once the legislative secretary receives the rules and regs from the administration. And so you count 90 days from the date it was received. If there's no action taken within that 90 days, then we were always of the understanding that those rules and regs will lapse into law. There are some instances where rules and regs have lapsed into law and we've never had an opportunity to address those rules and regs within the prescribed 90-day time frame, but we recognize that they're law because we just didn't act. I think the body was acting with good faith when it overwhelmingly voted to disapprove these rules and regs regarding the Chamorro Land Trust. And with respect to any retroactive provision, the bill on page 2, section 2 says disapproval of rules and regulations. The proposed Chamorro Land Trust rules, the proposed Chamorro Land Trust Commission CLTC rules and regulations for commercial use transmitted to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam on June 3, 2015 by Imagalan, Guam pursuant to the Administrative Education Law are hereby disapproved by Legislature in Guam pursuant to Title V GCA subsection 9303C. So if this piece of legislation which was vetoed is overridden today, then certainly the rules that were submitted, the same rules that the governor is asking to the Attorney General if they're going to be implemented as a matter of law, the bill is very clear that we're referencing these particular rules and regs. So if we're able to secure an override, then it's very clear, Madam Speaker and colleagues, that these rules and regs are not to be considered law by virtue of ongoing act of this legislature. So I thank you for the opportunity to close on the override, and again, I hope that as difficult as this decision is, I hope that we will side on behalf of the institution and the people and affirm that the legislature's disapproval of these rules and regs has to stand. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. So on the motion, notwithstanding the objections of Imagalan Guam to place vetoed Bill 139 in the voting file to override. No objections, so ordered. Notwithstanding then the objections of Imagalan Guam on the matter of vetoed Bill 139, I'd like to ask the clerk to please take roll call.
Senator Tom Atta. Senator Tom Atta, aye. Senator Tony Atta. Senator Tony Atta, nay. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, aye. Senator Blas. Senator Blas, nay. Vice Speaker Cruz. Vice Speaker Cruz, aye. Senator Espaldon. Senator Espaldon, pass. Senator McCready. Senator McCready, nay. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, nay. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Munya Barnes, aye. Senator Respicio. Senator Respicio, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator Sinicholas. Senator Sinicholas, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, aye. Senator Underwood. Senator Underwood, aye. Speaker Wampat.
Good.
Speaker Wampat, aye. Senator Espaldon. Senator Espaldon, aye.
On the matter of vetoed Bill 139-33, notwithstanding the objections of Imagalan Guam, the numbers are 11 yea votes, 4 nay votes. Vetoed Bill number 139-33 is overwritten by Iminat Gentaiches na Legislature in Guam. Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that we adjourn subject to the call of the Speaker.
On that motion, no objection, so ordered.